The day they tore down my family's dam. Sandra Puit stood on the creek bank like she'd finally beaten some ancient nuisance into submission, and 6 weeks later, 14 of her own neighbors were pumping creek water out of their homes. I need that to land before anything else because this was not bad luck. I modeled the flood in writing before it happened and mailed it certified to the attorney suing me. And still they smiled while the excavator broke apart a structure that had been protecting that valley since 1909. My name is Daniel Olden. I'm a hydrologist, 14 years in flood control and watershed work, and I do not exaggerate for effect. I grew up on 44 acres in rural Tennessee on land my great-grandfather bought in 1901 where Sycamore Creek cuts through pasture and woods, an old family memory. The stone dam at the narrow point of that creek wasn't decoration. It made the pond where every Olden kid learned to swim and slowed floodwater before it hit the subdivision downstream. That subdivision, Maple Rest Hollow, was built in the 90s on land county maps had long marked as floodplain. For decades, those people stayed mostly dry, and most of them never once asked why. The answer was sitting upstream on my family's land doing its job so well nobody noticed it. I left home at 18, got my degrees, spent 12 years explaining water to planners and regulators, then moved back to the farm in 2019 after my father died. I came back to restore the place. But it was also grief work. So I restored the dam first. 3 freezing weekends in November, waist-deep in creek water, repointing old granite, and when I finished, I felt something in me settle for the first time since the funeral. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter from the Maple Rest Hollow HOA. It was signed by Sandra Puit, board president, former paralegal, polished, the kind of woman who can make a threat sound like a courtesy. She called my family's dam an unpermitted obstruction of natural waterway flow and assessed a fine. That was absurd on its face. My property predates that subdivision by almost a century. It has no HOA covenants, no legal connection to Maple Rest Hollow at all. Sandra had no authority over my land. Still, I called her. She answered herself all pleasant and precise and told me the HOA attorney had identified language giving them authority over shared watershed infrastructure adjacent to community property. I wrote that sentence down word for word, thanked her, hung up, and opened a binder. I put the date on the front. Then I wrote her exact words beneath it. I called it the file. I do not lose my temper first. I build a record first. Over the next several months, Sandra filed complaint after complaint with the county. All dismissed. Then came the fine notices one after another, each dressed up in official language, each citing codes that didn't apply. I answered every one by certified mail with the help of my attorney, Gerald Watley, a quiet property lawyer who knew exactly what Sandra was doing. He said it plain, she knows this has no force. She's building a record. He was right. Sandra wasn't trying to prove jurisdiction. She was trying to make resistance expensive. Time, legal fees, mental energy pile enough on somebody and eventually surrender starts to look cheaper than being right. Problem was documentation doesn't scare me. It calms me down. By fall of 2021, she'd gone public. HOA meetings, live streams, Facebook posts, all of it painting my family's dam as some cracked old hazard threatening innocent homeowners downstream. I attended one of those meetings with inspection photos, a licensed structural assessment, and the law. Didn't matter. The room didn't want evidence. It wanted someone to blame. One homeowner, Derek Foss, cut me off and said they didn't move out there to have some farmer's junk deciding what happened to their neighborhood. I drove home in silence that night. My sister called from Memphis one Sunday and gently asked whether I had considered just taking the dam down to make it all stop. I was sitting on the porch listening to the spillway, looking at the pond reflecting a half moon, and I told her no. Because by then it wasn't just about the dam, it was about whether somebody with a title on a neighborhood Facebook page got to reach uphill into land her subdivision never owned and start rewriting reality. The nuisance complaint landed in January of 2022, asking the court to compel removal of the dam. Gerald called it what it was, a pressure tactic dressed up as litigation. What Sandra didn't know was that I had already started building a hydrologic impact model showing exactly what would happen if the dam came out. Then came the twist that changed everything. 3 weeks before the hearing, I found fresh tire tracks in my south pasture. Trail cameras I'd installed months earlier caught 2 men on my property measuring and photographing the dam. One of them was the same unlicensed contractor Sandra had used before. When I pulled older footage, I found 3 separate trespass incidents over 14 months. I sent all of it to Gerald that night. 2 days later, he called back with a different energy in his voice. We weren't just defending anymore, we were counterclaiming. Sandra's side asked for a continuance. The judge denied it. 2 days before the hearing, their attorney floated a settlement. I removed the dam, pay part of the bogus fines, and everybody walks away. I asked for 48 hours. I used those 48 hours to finish the document I had been building in secret, a 31-page flood analysis mapping rainfall scenarios, surge timing, attenuation loss, and the specific homes in Maple Rest Hollow that would flood if the dam was removed. Then I mailed it certified to Sandra's attorney, the County Planning Commission, state regulators, and the Army Corps office in Memphis. After that, I told Gerald to accept the settlement. Sandra thought removing the dam meant she had won. I knew all she had really done was strip the braking system off Sycamore Creek right before spring rain. They removed the dam on April 9th, 2022. I stood 20 feet back and recorded it on my phone. The stone face broke apart, section by section, old granite dropping into the current with that final sound masonry makes when it stops being structure and turns back into rubble. By April 11th, the pond was gone, just mud, exposed roots, and the old foundation cuts my great-grandfather made in 1909. I loaded several of those original stones into my truck. The storm arrived this night of April 15th, exactly the kind I had modeled, steady spring rain, no thunder show, just water that settled over the valley like it planned to stay. By the next morning, Sycamore Creek was running fast and brown higher than normal, not because the storm was historic, but because nothing upstream was holding the peak anymore. I documented flow rate and channel speed, then I went inside, made coffee, and waited. Emergency calls started coming out of Maple Rest Hollow that same day. Culverts overwhelmed, overflow channels backing up. By afternoon, 6 homes had water in their basements. By the next morning, 14 homes had flooded and 3 families had water on the first floor, actual furniture moving, children sent to relatives, flooding. Sandra Puitt's own house took 14 inches on the ground floor. And I want to be honest here because this is the part people always want turned into revenge theater. I did not feel triumphant. I felt sad. There is a particular kind of heartbreak in watching real families suffer through something you warned about in exact detail and could not stop because one person needed to win more than she needed to listen. The real blowback came online. 3 weeks earlier, Sandra had posted a smiling photo with champagne and the caption, "Community wins." After the flood, that same page filled with ruined drywall-soaked couches, kids' toys stacked on lawns. Then a homeowner named Carol Mattis found the cover letter from my warning packet and posted it. He told us, she wrote, he literally told us exactly this would happen. By the time we got to court on April 26th, the room was packed with homeowners who had spent the prior week ripping wet sheetrock out of their walls. Judge Beckett reviewed the filings, expanded the counterclaim, and then asked Sandra's attorney how exactly his client planned to explain receiving a certified flood risk analysis and telling none of her own neighbors. During recess, 3 HOA board members peeled away from Sandra and retained separate counsel. Settlement talks opened fast after that. 30 days later, Sandra's side paid $31,500 legal fees, documentation costs, damage tied to the removal, all of it, no admission of wrongdoing. Fine by me. I didn't need the apology. I needed the public record. Then karma finished the job. The HOA voted Sandra out 41-9. A licensed engineering firm was hired to assess the neighborhood drainage system, and their findings matched mine, almost line for line. Sandra listed her flooded house in August and sold it below pre-flood value. The liability she had tried so hard to pin on my land ended up attached to her own address. That's the lesson that stayed with me. Power without understanding is dangerous, and ego gets expensive when it starts messing with systems it cannot control. Rivers do not care about pride. Water keeps better records than people do, and sooner or later it submits them. I rebuilt the dam that fall with grant money settlement funds and a licensed restoration contractor, modern concrete core, restored stone face, engineered spillway built to current standards, but from the bank, it looks like it has always belonged there, because it has. The first morning the pond filled back to its old line, my sister brought my niece and nephew up from Memphis. My nephew walked straight in with his shoes on my niece right behind him, both of them laughing in that cold water like children do when the world feels safe enough to trust. I stood on the bank and realized the whole fight had never only been about defending old stone. It was about protecting continuity, holding the line long enough for the next set of small feet to inherit something whole. So let me ask you this, when somebody gets expert warnings, hides the risk from their own neighbors and families pay the price, is that just negligence? Or does it become something worse? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, or some petty little tyrant who mistook persistence for authority, tell me about it in the comments. I want to hear where you think the line is between defending what's yours and making sure karma has the address.